right. I said I wanted to do a video on this yesterday in this whole Euro Copa America Requiem for the Summer of Soccer recap, but I wanted to wait for the decision to come down. It has officially come down this morning that Gareth Southgate is stepping down from the managerial position of the England national team. He leaves after 8 years, compiling 102 games as manager. So he reached that 100 game mark as manager in the quarterfinals of the Euro. He leaves with a 61, 24, and 17 record. And it felt like this was time. It's both happy and a sad moment that he's leaving. I can say personally, he has been the best manager I've seen in my lifetime for an England national team. But also, I can very much make the point that it was very much time for him to go. I think he may have overstayed his welcome just a little bit, but we'll get into all of that, obviously, in due course. But the big news is that Gareth Southgate is stepping down. And it begins this, of course, search. It begins a search for what's next. So I thought before we take a look at what's next, let's take a look at what happened. So coming into the Southgate era, it was just a disastrous run for England. Of course, the failure of Euro 2016, where they end up losing to Iceland in the round of 16, which is just disastrous for England. It forces real change. Roy Hodgson was the manager at Euro 2016. He steps down. England, the FA, brings in Sam Allardyce. Sam Allardyce is expected to be, the leader for tournaments to come. After one game, one win, Sam Allardyce steps down due to an investigation that happens, and England once again are on the search for a new manager. They go to Southgate, who of course is an English hero player-wise, also remembered for the penalty miss in that 96 Euro semi-final against Germany at Wembley. He was the U21 manager for England at the time. He gets promoted to the head job of national team manager, and it seemed like this is his job now. This non-temporary role, he is getting this job, and we have to make it work with him. And Southgate came in. He wanted to establish a whole new set of playing style and wanted to get people in England and around the world believing in England again. And it was going to be a tough task. But the first challenge was obviously getting through that year of 2016 and getting into 2017, qualifying for the World Cup in 2018, and then seeing where we go from there. So let's start off with that era from the 2016 to 2018 era under Southgate. Now, 2016 ends with him going 2-2-0, so he still has yet to lose. He didn't really face off against any outstanding competition. He did face off against a Spain team at Wembley that were, I'd still say they were quite good at the time, but it ended up being a 2-2 draw. That was the first real test, I thought, of the Southgate era, and even though it wasn't a pass, it also wasn't really a failure there. We move on to 2017, where once again, you face Germany right out of the gate. You lose 1-0. That I felt like was that was the second real test of the Southgate era, and that's his first trip up. And you'll kind of notice as we go on, Southgate, one of his big struggles was getting the wins against the big teams, and that has been an indictment on him since the day he started. As you can see, a 2-2 draw against Spain, a 1-0 loss to Germany. Obviously, if you look down at the end of 2017, you have 2 0-0 draws against Germany and Brazil. But then if we go back up, you have a 3-2 loss against France. In the beginning, it was a real struggle, and it's something that just carried on with Southgate until the end. Uh, 2017, I mean, that's just a year where you have to get qualified for the World Cup. And that's what he did successfully. Won all the qualifying games except one, which was a 2-2 draw in Glasgow against Scotland. Given, obviously, the circumstances, that's somewhat of a win. Obviously, you don't get the 3 points in the table, but you do get a point, and you're taking away home points from Scotland, and that was one of many ways that England got through to this 2018 World Cup. So the build up to the 2018 World Cup saw 2 games in March and 2 games in June, all of them being friendlies. The March window felt much more heavy with top matchups. You have the Netherlands in there, and then you have an Italy team that did not qualify for the World Cup, but still gave a tough challenge. You go to Amsterdam, get a 1-0 victory. I say that was the first real signature victory, I guess I would say, of the Southgate era. And then you get a 1-1 draw in London against Italy, which, I mean, it's not awful, but it's still not great. And then you face off against Nigeria and Costa Rica. You get a 2-1 and 2-0 victory there. And then you are into the World Cup. And the group stage went well, even though the 1-0 loss to Belgium is in there on that final group day. But, I mean, a 2-1 win against Tunisia and a 6-1 win against Panama very much put England in the driver's seat to advance on to the round of 16, which they did. And this was the first really big moment of that Southgate era. It was a 4-3 penalty victory against Colombia, something that this nation had never seen before. A penalty shootout victory on such a big stage for a country that is, so cursed by the penalties. To get a win against what was still then a very good Colombia team. Obviously, they fell off after that World Cup. They've now risen back from that. But to get a penalty victory there, it felt like something really special was finally building for England. You get a 2-0 win against Sweden. You're on to the semifinals. This is your first semifinals since that Euro 96 that Southgate was a part of. And you'll start to notice a trend here of how deep England go in tournaments under Southgate. But it would be a Croatia goal in extra time that would move them on to the World Cup final. And England would be relegated to that third place playoff, which they lost 2-0 to Belgium, a team that they had faced in the group stage of the tournament. So you come back from that, you go into the Nations League, and this is the first iteration of the Nations League, I believe. It was a new tournament giving, teams at the lower bottoms of UEFA better opportunities to play more significant games, and it becomes like a table system. I think there's 4 leagues. It's A, B, C, and D. Of course, England are put in League A. That will be something to remember for later on. But they start off this competition with a 2-1 home loss to Spain, but then they don't give up anything else after that. You go 1-0 win against Switzerland, a 0-0 draw in Croatia against Croatia, a very famous 3-2 victory against Spain. You have an international friendly against the United States thrown in there. And then to round out 2018, you advance on to the Nations League semifinals with a 2-1 victory over Croatia. So once again, England are moving on to a semifinal under Southgate. So we move into 2019. This starts the beginning of Euro 2020 qualifying. Of course, at this time, the Euro was just in a year's time. But of course, things would massively change in the upcoming year. But England would start off flying with a 5-0 victory against the Czech Republic and a 5-1 victory in Montenegro against Montenegro. We then get to June of 2019, the first Nations League semifinal. England fall in extra time. Where have you heard that before? 3-1 to the Netherlands. But in that third place game in Portugal, England, after a 0-0 game, goes to penalties, wins 6-5 on penalties, and claims third place in the Nations League. Now, that would be the highest England would ever finish in the Nations League. You keep going through qualifying. You do slip up against the Czech Republic 2-1 in Prague. But, I mean, it was smooth sailing for England going through qualifying. Of course, then we hit 2020. We don't even get to the first international window, and COVID hits. The Euro is then postponed to 2021 in there. So qualifying will continue for the rest of 2020. England slip up none of the times in Euro qualifying. They then go into Nations League qualifying in 2020. And they slip up. They draw 0-0 in Denmark. Then they lose on home soil against Denmark. And then a 2-0 loss in Belgium seals their fate. They would not be advancing on to the Nations League semifinals this time around. Now, we get into 2021. 2021 was the most packed schedule we would see an England team play in quite some time, and probably will never see them play this packed of a schedule in the future. Just given World Cup qualifying begins at the beginning of 2021. You're playing 3 matches per window now, just given the way this schedule has now compiled. And England, they're flying. You get into the Euro, which basically was a home tournament for them. They left Wembley once, and that was for a quarterfinal game we'll get to. But Group D, they start off with a 1-0 win against Croatia. That really felt like the start of this tournament for them. Even though they weren't playing outstanding brands of football, getting a 1-0 win against still a very good Croatia team at that point felt like a victory. 0-0 draws against Scotland really doesn't lighten the mood, but they move on as group champions with a 1-0 victory against the Czech Republic in the final match day. Now, that win would set up a game in the round of 16 against eternal rivals Germany. This felt like it was time for Southgate to make a statement on a big stage, and that's exactly what he did. A 2-0 victory against Germany in London at Wembley felt like that was going to be the biggest moment that Southgate has. Of course, as we keep going on in the tournament, he would have bigger moments, but this was truly, I believe, the first signature victory under Southgate. A tournament game against, an eternal rival, and you get a resounding 2-0 victory. And I still think it was one of Southgate's best games that he had under his tenure, getting that victory. So with that victory, you move on to the quarterfinals, which was, as I said, the only game that England played outside of Wembley in Euro 2020, and that was a 4-0 win against Ukraine. You go back to London for the semis, where after extra time, you get a 2-1 victory, and you are moving on to your first final since that 1966 World Cup final, and a chance to finally win a trophy for the first time in so long. And it ends on penalties. Penalty heartbreak again at Wembley. Brings back a lot of flashbacks from 1996 for Southgate as Italy lift the trophy on July 11th. You move back into World Cup qualifying. England don't lose a game in the year 2021. They have 4 draws, including 2 draws in World Cup qualifying, a 1-1 game in Warsaw against Poland, and a 1-1 game against Hungary in London. But as I said, England were flying through 2021. You then move on to 2022, which felt like a real turning point for Southgate. Of course, you're going into a World Cup year. The World Cup's not at the normal time. And you have a Nations League mixed in there. This is where it started to feel like it was really falling apart for Southgate. A horrendous Nations League campaign sees them relegated from League A as they do not win one game. They have 3 draws and 3 losses. Losses in Budapest against Hungary, in Wolverhampton, which that game truly was, I think, the turning point for fan support against Southgate. A 4-0 loss to England in Wolverhampton, and then a 1-0 loss against Italy in Milan. You face that with a 1-1 draw against Germany in Munich, 0-0 draw against Italy in Wolverhampton, and then a 3-3 draw, which was a very exciting game, but they just couldn't get it done in London to close out that Nations League campaign. You go into the World Cup, still have belief, you're still one of the favorites. You fly through Group B with ease, a 6-2 win against Iran, a 0-0 draw against the United States, and a 3-0 win against Wales. Put you into the round of 16 with a matchup against Senegal, which you win 3-0. But then in the quarterfinal waiting for you was the defending champions, France. You fall in that game 2-1. A Harry Kane missed penalty in the last 10 minutes denies extra time for England. And this is where I kind of thought Southgate's going to step aside and we're going to have a new manager, new cycle. Euro qualifying starts next year. It's going to be a new cycle, new manager. We'll see what we can do in 2024. The FA extends Gareth Southgate's contract to the end of Euro 2024. So he's getting one more tournament, which I totally didn't disagree with. I didn't love it, though. I was hoping he would step aside. He instead stays on. And for the 2023 year, once again, no losses. I thought it was a pretty decent turnaround. The football wasn't the greatest, but it still felt like, hey, maybe we've got a handle on things. 1-1 draw against Ukraine wasn't the end of the world, wasn't great. Then a 1-1 draw against North Macedonia. Once again, wasn't great, but wasn't the end of the world. As we move into 2024, the Euro coming up, it's time to see what Southgate has for one final time, or who knows, maybe he leads us to glory and he's there in 2026. And it doesn't go great. The international friendlies leading up to Euro was quite awful. I know there were a lot of people, including myself, saying, what are we doing? A 1-0 loss to Brazil, a 2-2 draw against a bad Belgium team. You get a 3-0 win against Bosnia. You still didn't look great. And then to close out your final game before the Euro is a 1-0 loss against Iceland. Hopes were not high, even though the experts in the betting world had England as the favorite in Euro 2024. Hopes were not high coming to the Euro. And after the group stage, hopes were even lower. There were calls for Southgate to be sacked after the group stage just because it was that bad. A 1-0 win against Serbia would be the only win of any team in this group, as the rest all draw. A Denmark 1-1 draw against England and a 0-0 draw against Slovenia. See England finish top of the group because of that win against Serbia. A bunch of tiebreakers later on down the table. Then you move into the round of 16. You get Slovakia. You're down 1-0 basically the whole game. It feels like, okay, this is the end for Southgate. For real this time. Jude Bellingham scores an absolute wonder goal. Sends us to extra time. Harry Kane puts it in the back of the net. It's 2-1 England. And they move on to the quarterfinals where they would face off against Switzerland. And once again, we would be going to penalties. And once again, it felt like a turning of a page as England convert all 5 of their penalties and win 5-3 on penalties and advance on to the semifinal where the Netherlands would be waiting for them. And the Netherlands felt like this would be the toughest test of the tournament so far. They're just completely different from any other team England had saw. They go down 1-0 early again. Subs are made as England equalized, just 10 minutes after that goal with a penalty. Going on through the game, this was even. Those subs were made then. Ollie Watkins, one of them brought on. He scores a wonder goal just at the start of stoppage time. gives England a 2-1 victory. They're moving on to the final, where they would face the best team of this tournament by far, and that was Spain. Of course, they fall to Spain 2-1 in the final off a goal in the, I think it was 86th or 87th minute. So that is the Southgate era in full. Of course, I mean, there's still so many more like little details mixed in there that weren't mentioned, but this is now where we're at. Southgate has stepped down. What's next? That's the question now. What's next? And I think it's a valid question because I don't know what direction the FA wants to go in. Southgate, again, I think it can be very much argued and agreed on. Southgate is the second best manager England's ever had. Of course, he didn't bring any trophies, but it felt like he brought joy back to this England team. That's what this truly felt like. And after the doldrums they were in 2016, nobody would have believed you when you would say, oh, Southgate got you to at least the semifinals in 3 out of the 4 major tournaments he took part in. He got you to a final twice. Everybody would sign up for that immediately. Now, of course, the way the football was played, especially near the end, not the greatest. That was an indictment on Southgate, but I still think history ends up looking on Gareth Southgate very kindly as the English manager. I mean, getting to a semifinal in your first major tournament in 2018 World Cup, when there were no expectations whatsoever, that's a feat on its own. Getting to a final basically on home soil in Euro 2020, coming basically 2 kicks away from winning a tournament. Just huge. And then obviously the final in Berlin just falls apart at the end. Just kind of felt fitting as the end of the Southgate era. Now the question is, what's next? Well, if we take a look at the fixtures first of what's next, England under whoever this is for the rest of 2024, it's going to be Nations League Group B. Or League B, I should say. Nations League confusing. Like I said, those matches back in 2022 get England relegated to League B. So they will be in a group with the Republic of Ireland, of course, Finland and Greece. And then, of course, you'll play reverse fixtures there. And this will all be done at the end of this year. So you're going to have 2 games in September, 2 games in October, 2 games in November. And then the Nations League for 2024-25 is over. England's obviously, I think their main goal is just to get promoted once again to League A. There's no trophy to go along with this, but the goal should be, with the talent they have, is to advance on or back to League A under whatever manager that is. Now, that's going to be the question again. What is the next manager? I think there are 3 realistic targets, 2 that are semi-unrealistic, but I could still see happening. Number 1, top of the list of realistic targets, Eddie Howe, the manager for Newcastle. I think if he struggles this year at Newcastle, he's gone no matter what. This could just be an easy jump-off point. I think he would be an amazing manager for England, which is why I think he may end up taking the job no matter what if he's offered it. Number 2 on that list of realistic option, I have Lee Carsley, who is the England U21 manager. He's in the same position Southgate was in. He plays a very attacking style of football that seems to fit the players that England have now. And I mean, it would obviously be a step up in competition, but I think he could take a similar flow to what Southgate did with this England team if he takes over. And the third and final realistic option I believe there is, it's Graham Potter. And as you notice, all 3 of those managers are English, which I think is going to be a requirement in the end. So they may only be the 3 targets. But Graham Potter has been unemployed since his Chelsea spell. He's gotten offers for jobs and has turned them down, which makes me wonder if he kind of had a, hey, when Southgate leaves, do you want to be the manager type deal in place? Obviously, we don't know if that's a thing, but It may be a thing. You never know. I think all three of those managers would have very much. I won't say very much success. I'll say they will have success. Will they lead England to bringing football home for the first time? It's gonna be 60 years the next time that they have an opportunity, which is 2026. Whoever this manager is, will they be good enough to bring football home is the real question. Now, I did say I have two semi-unrealistic options, but could potentially still happen. Number one, or I guess on the list technically of what I was going, number 4, I'm going to put Thomas Tuchel. The German, of course, got somewhat fired, somewhat left Bayern Munich at the end of this year. I think he would be a very good international manager. Obviously, his football isn't the most exciting, but I think the style of football he plays is set up for international games and international tournaments. And number 5, and it's semi-realistic, semi-unrealistic. It's Pep Guardiola, the manager from Manchester City, has said he's leaving at the end of this upcoming season, so that would be 2025. And I say this mostly unrealistic because England would have to have an interim manager for basically a year. I don't think that's something the FA really wants to do, which makes me believe that Pep Guardiola, not really an option here. I think it's going to be one of the 3 English managers. I think any 3 of them will have success with this team, and I'm hoping that it's one of those 3. And if it's not, I do worry. I do worry. So given that, like I said, I kind of just wanted to go through the Southgate era. This is the era that made me re-fall in love with England. So as much as it is a sad day to see him go, it kind of feels like this needed to happen. So somewhat glad we're at this point, somewhat glad or sad that we are at this point also. Gareth Southgate has been a tremendous leader for this team, and I have no doubt that he's going to get another job if he wants one. I particularly look across the seas to the nation I am currently in that is looking for a manager right now as they prepare to co-host World Cup 2026. I think that would be a great landing spot for Gareth Southgate. So that's going to wrap it up for this special episode of whatever you want to call this. Just Southgate is out as England manager. What comes next is the real question. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Nick Bird Sports Network. If you just stumbled across this video, click like, click subscribe, tell anybody you know about it. We have content everywhere popping up in different sports. So make sure you check out all of that. Of course, Euros and Copa America are over, but that just means the club season's right around the corner, and that's going to be exciting. So hopefully you enjoy that. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again soon here on the Nick Burt Sports Network.